Hello everyone, welcome to Axiom's Edge with Andy Klein. When people think of Indonesia, they think of a Muslim majority country. But of course not everyone who lives in Indonesia is Muslim. There are also sizable populations of Christians and Hindus, and even a growing number of atheists. But what is it like to be an atheist in a Muslim majority country? Well, in this podcast, we're going to talk to an Indonesian atheist to find out. To protect herself from possible persecution, she goes by the pseudonym of Josephine. Josephine's going to give us her insight on what it's like holding no belief in one of the most religious countries in the world. Okay, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Josephine. Josephine, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Okay, well, Josephine, you grew up in Indonesia, which most people think of as a Muslim majority country, but you grew up Catholic. Can you tell us what that was like?
Well, obviously, Catholic is a very minor religion in Indonesia. It only makes up about less than 1% of the population. But if you go to the Catholic groups in Indonesia, they're actually really devout, almost as devout as their Muslim counterparts. And growing up Catholic in Indonesia is, frankly, I say it, unique experience, I think, because it's a mostly populated by Muslim country, and suddenly you are a Catholic and people around you are all Muslims, and you can't relate to them, and sometimes they could hate you for having different religion to them. And the church that I went to obviously had suffered from attacks a few times before. Like, we had dynamites thrown at us when we were having a weekly mass once.
You had dynamite thrown at you during mass?
Yes, dynamite, and then some firecrackers as well.
Who threw them?
It's just the people that live nearby the church, and they are mostly Muslims. And even though they live near the church, they don't really like Christians. So we often get some threats like that from time to time.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, we hear a lot in the West that Indonesia is such a successful Muslim country because it's a democracy, and I think they believe it's very liberal. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think in the past, the country itself is quite liberal, especially during the reign of the second president, President Suharto, because during his time of presidency, people were not allowed to be so vocal about their religious beliefs or their ideologies. So at that time, the country was quite liberal, was quite open, to be frankly. But since his fall in 1998 Reformation, I think because the new government allows people to say whatever they want most of the time, religious fundamentalism began to grow. And as you can see, it has grown to this state that's been talked about right now.
Right. Okay, well, I want to get into the politics a little later. Right now, let's stay focused on you. So
sure.
you grew up a Catholic, and now you've come out as an atheist. How did this come about? When did it happen? How did it happen?
I think I started doubting about my faith when I was in the first year of junior high school. And at that time, I just lost my father. And then, of course, in Catholic beliefs, you were taught that, this world is not all there is. Once you die, you might go to heaven or to hell or to the purgatory. But when you see somebody close to you, especially a member of your family, died, you sort of gain the ability to see like how small and how insignificant your life is, how easily it is to end somebody's life. So, in the Catholic beliefs, it is taught that human is like the supreme creature aside of God. Like we are the number one on earth, and then
Right,
but
we're made in His
when
image.
and then from that point started to doubt my faith, and then through the internet I began reading lots of materials, and the first material that I came across to was Richard Dawkins' book called The Magic of Reality.
Have you told your mom that you're atheist?
No, not yet. Well, obviously, one of the reasons I haven't told her because she's a really devout Catholic. She still does go to weekly mass every week, and she's an active member of the church. And can you imagine how she would react if I told her that I was an atheist?
Yeah, she probably wouldn't take that too well, huh?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell her? Do you plan on telling her, or do you let it slide?
For now, I don't think I will be telling her the truth anytime soon, but eventually I think I need to tell her.
Okay, and how about your friends? Can you come out in Indonesian society and just say, hey, you know what? I don't believe in God anymore.
You can't go around saying that to people in public or in your social media accounts. That's a no-no. But I actually have a couple of friends who are at least as agnostics, and I have told them that I was an atheist, and they actually accepted my opinion, well, quite peacefully, because some of them actually have some doubts in their beliefs as well. And it also helps that I live in Jakarta, which is obviously a big city, and Jakarta is home to many foreigners, so people that comes from Jakarta tend to be more open-minded than in other cities.
Right. So, can you give us an idea about how open you can be in declaring, hey, I'm not religious or I'm an atheist? It sounds like it's kind of, you have to remain underground almost. Is that true?
Yes, I think for now, atheism is not widely accepted by the general public of Indonesia. As you might have heard, just recently there's a case of a man in Aceh who was being, do you know Aceh? It's
yes, Aceh province.
Yes, and there's a man there, and he said that he does not believe in God, so they actually implement some sort of
Lashing?
Yeah, slashing.
So it was like a cane.
They lashed him.
So they used a cane to beat him. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
But it's not always like that. Obviously, in other cities, you won't get a punishment as harsh as that, but it's still very negatively viewed across Indonesia.
Right. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with Alexander On of Sumatra, who came out on Facebook and said that he was an atheist. And under the Indonesian blasphemy law, which carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison, he received 2.5 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that case actually makes me very sad, because a lot of people, and even the law itself, prioritizes religious beliefs over humanity,
Right. And under Indonesian law, they only recognize 6 religions, is that right? You can only declare yourself...
6 official religions.
Can you tell us what they are?
Yes, of course. Under the Indonesian law, you have to identify as either first Muslim, second Christian, third a Catholic, fourth a Buddhist, fifth a Hindu, or the last one is Confucianism.
Wow, Confucianism made it on the list, huh?
Yes, actually Confucianism just made the list, I think, in 2004 or 2005 during the fourth presidential reign.
Okay, is that because there's a growing number of ethnic Chinese in Indonesia?
Yes, I think that plays a part in it.
How many ethnic Chinese Indonesians are Muslim?
Wow, I think there are some of them, but their number is very small.
Let's talk about the ethnic Chinese. First of all, there was a recent election in Jakarta for governor where Anies Baswedan won the governor's election. He defeated the Chinese Indonesian Christian Basuki Ahok, who was slandered, protested against, issued a fatwa, and arrested and prosecuted, serving jail time for blasphemy charge he's now been cleared of. What is your opinion of the election?
I think the election is ridiculous because obviously religion is just a tool that's being used to control the election, and a lot of these religious issues actually was being spread by some elite politics who didn't want Ahok to serve a second term. Right. So it's not about the religion. It's always about politics.
Yeah, he faced some fierce opposition from the Muslim People's Forum, Islam Defenders Front, Ulama Council. Can you tell us about the fatwa that was issued against him? He was accused of blaspheming a Quranic verse that many scholars say urges Muslims to only vote for Muslim politicians.
In the Al-Quran, there is a verse that actually states that if you're a Muslim, you need to choose a Muslim leader over a non-Muslim one. So that's the first reason. And then the second reason was actually like a year ago, Ahok actually said that some Muslim people were being deceived by using the tool called Surat Al-Maidah 52, and that's a verse from the Al-Quran. But his words were misinterpreted. People misunderstood what Ahok said, and they actually think that Ahok says that the Al-Quran deceives them. And because of that, a lot of Muslim people, a lot of fundamentalists hated him because of that.
Right, yeah. Quite a few, I'd say, because there's 3 widespread demonstrations, between 20 to 50,000 Muslims shutting down Jakarta in protest against this?
Yeah, there was a protest in November 2016, I think. And at that time, thousands of Muslims actually gathered to protest Ahok.
Right. And now he's been cleared of that charge, but he's still on probation. I mean, we're talking about the governor being arrested and serving jail time. I mean, that's governor. Just incredible. So he's on probation for 2 years, and if
2 years or so.
If he's accused of blasphemy again, he goes to jail for 1 year. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Obviously, you can't do something like this in the U.S., right?
No, we don't have a blasphemy law. I hope we never do. I mean, in the U.S., you're supposed to have separation between church and state, or mosque and state, and in Indonesia, you guys don't have that.
In the U.S. Constitution, I think it is written that there is a separation between the church and the state.
Right.
But in Indonesian Constitution, the Pancasila, we do not have that. We do not have that distinction. And in Pancasila, it is actually written, roughly translates to the Almighty God.
Right.
So the country itself is built on the basis of a belief in higher power, a belief in God.
How close do you think Indonesia is to being a theocracy?
Well, because there are some leaders who are preventing that from happening, even though there are very few of them. I don't think that Indonesia will be a theocracy very soon, but it's not impossible for Indonesia to become a theocracy eventually if this goes on.
As we've seen from the Jakarta elections, it just seems like these fanatical Muslim groups are growing in strength and in power. Can you tell us how much power do they actually have and how many of them are there? Because some people may just say, hey, well, they're just a fringe of society. Their numbers are probably pretty small. Can you give us a clear idea of how many there are and what power they have influencing the government?
Well, obviously, inside the country itself, there are several factions of Muslims, several groups of Muslims, and the biggest group that has the biggest power is called Nahdlatul Ulama, and actually they are quite moderate, so they are a little bit liberal. So because of that, the state of Indonesian politics haven't fall down that bad yet, but there are several other groups who are really fundamental Muslims, and if they do grow in numbers, it will be very dangerous for the country because Nahdlatul Ulama wouldn't be able to stop them any longer.
Right. So now we have Anies Baswedan as the Jakarta governor, and he was helped tremendously by these radical Muslim groups. What do you see as the future for Jakarta and maybe Indonesia? Do you think that Anies will unite and say, hey, that was a crazy election, but let's unite and leave all that behind? Or do you think those Muslim groups are going to say, hey, we helped you get elected, and now it's your turn to help us?
Well, I think Anies Baswedan was just using the Muslim groups in order to gain power as the governor of Jakarta. So I think once he gets into the position of power, he will just abandon all those people that he was manipulating in order to get his power. Just because of that doesn't mean that he will be a good governor, because the people backing Anies are actually very corrupt people. So I'm afraid that once Anies Baswedan takes office, the corruption that's been pushed down by Ahok during his term of governance, I think the corruption will come back, and that's really worrying.
And a number of these Muslim groups, these extreme Muslim groups, were allegedly arrested on treason charges. That's really serious, needless to say, but it just points to this direction that there's, these radical Muslim groups that really want to bring on a Middle Eastern style theocracy. Can you tell us maybe what their ambitions are and why would they want to overthrow a Muslim majority run country, populated country anyways?
In order to address the issue, we must first realize that Indonesia is not a very well-developed country yet. Education is very, very poor in lots of cities. So because of that lack of education, those people living in small cities are actually being brainwashed by the Muslim clergies, and Muslim leaders living in their city, in their village. And because of that, those people were being used as a tool in order to achieve some people's ambition, which is making a caliphate country, a theocracy where Muslims rule.
You think that these groups do want to bring on a theocracy and do away with democracy in Indonesia?
Yes, I believe that their eventual goal is to overturn the current democratic government and replace it with a more theocracy form of government.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little about liberalism in Indonesia. I think many people in the West, again, have this idea because you're an Asian democracy, so democracies automatically equal liberalism and things like women's rights and gay rights and, hey, even atheist rights. How does that compare with what you know about Western liberalism?
Well, the biggest difference that I see is, of course, in most Western countries, there is a clear distinction between the church and the state, the religion and the government. In Western democracies, you don't see religion being used as a tool in order to manipulate people. And of course, there is this issue with human rights in Indonesia because a lot of people actually view LGBTs and equal rights as a bad thing, and I don't know why.
How many
and
people?
Because of those reasons, I think we are still a long way to go before we can be a democracy like the Western countries.
So the majority of Indonesians are anti-gay, anti-women's rights. Is that fair to say?
Yes, the majority of Indonesians are, how do you say it, homophobics.
Well, why do you think Indonesians aren't ready to embrace liberalism? I mean, a lot of them outright reject it. They don't want any kind of Western influence affecting their society. Can you elaborate as to why they think that way?
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, Indonesia was under the annexation of the Dutch for more than 350 years. So during that time, a lot of Indonesians suffered from inequality, injustice, from abuse, and they had their lands, their culture, their money taken away by foreign people. So I think the hatred and the unwillingness to have foreign or Western influences influence the things that are going on in the country. I think it stems from that point of history.
It's resentment towards colonialism. That certainly makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, and let's talk about the group Indonesian Atheists that you're a member of. Why did you decide to join the group?
Well, at first I didn't think that there will be such a group, but there is, and I joined the group because I want to find other people who think similarly to me, and that are Indonesians.
Do you guys meet?
I think every month there is a meeting for the members. For example, if you're living in Bali, you can go to a meeting conducted by members living in Bali, or if you're living in Jakarta, they have a monthly meeting for Jakarta members and such.
Oh, I see. I didn't even think about Bali because, I mean, Bali is like a totally different world in Indonesia. It's obviously a Hindu majority. It's obviously a vacation destination, and it's a very beautiful place.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I've been to Bali many times and have really enjoyed it. One thing that always gets brought up about Bali is, it's further proof that Indonesia is a solid democratic country, and religion and politics can certainly coexist and be productive. But when I was in Bali, I was talking with one of the waitresses there, and I mean, first of all, you really can't help it but notice, like, the Balinese just serving mostly Australian tourists. It's almost like a slave-master relationship. I mean, you walk down the street and they call you boss. And I asked this waitress, I don't know how we got on this topic, but she was talking about her son and how she has no time to spend with them, and how they're pretty much just caught in this spiritual runaround, if you will, because they're always getting ready for ceremonies or performing ceremonies, or they have to work. Here we have this situation on Bali where spirituality, as beautiful as their ceremonies and rituals are, just controls their lives, and they can't break out of it. What is your opinion of Bali?
First of all, I think Bali is a really beautiful place, and the people there are very kind, very open, very compassionate, and a lot of people in Bali are actually very religious. in the and they take their religious beliefs very seriously. But the difference that I see between Balinese people and the majority of Indonesians are they're not using their religion to push other people, to hate on other people.
Right.
And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, they really have a much more tolerant way of
Yes,
practicing
they're really
their religion
tolerant.
and beliefs. One time when I was on Gili Mino, I met these three young girls, and
Uh-huh.
because I have a son, and they were playing with him, and my wife went up to meet them, and the first thing they asked her was, "What's your religion?" And of course, Gili Mino is a Muslim island, and the second question was about hell. And the terror, these girls were probably about 6 years, yes, hell. And these girls were about 6 years old, and the terror in their eyes was it's just ingrained in my memory and my wife's memory, just how terrified these girls were. And I told them, there's never been any evidence that such a place exists. And they just had never even dreamt of that being a possibility. Can you talk to us about the education in Indonesia? How much time is spent per day at school teaching about religion?
So in Indonesia, there is a system of compulsory religious education starting from the first year of elementary school until the last year of senior high school, and they actually teach religious education even when you're in university. So they start really young. I mean, first grade elementary school students being taught that, oh, if you lie, you're going to hell. How's that a good thing?
Wow.
Starts really young, and because of that, they cannot fathom the thought that there is a possibility that God, that heaven, that hell might not exist at all.
Right. They don't give them the chance to develop and think for themselves. They don't try to get them to critically think. They just do mind control.
Exactly.
And how many hours a day do students go to school in Indonesia?
Well, it differs depending on the school, but with public school, when you're in elementary school, I think it's about 5 hours.
Okay.
And when you are in junior high school, it's about 6 to 7, and in high school, it could be 7 to 8.
Okay, so let's stick with elementary school, because that's so pivotal when you're warping the minds of another human being to get them early. How many hours in a 5-hour school day would they teach about religion?
In more religious schools, they teach at least an hour a day of religious education.
What about when you're in middle school?
In middle school, the portion could increase, and when you're in high school, you actually learn about religion, like, I don't know, 3 to 4 hours maybe.
Wow, 3 to 4 hours?
Yes, and then that's in a more religious spectrum of the schools. But even in common schools, in a more secular school, they usually start the day by praying, and then they end the day by praying as well. So religion is always intertwined in their daily lives.
That kind of puts atheism at an extreme disadvantage. Of course, critically thinking and thinking for yourself. I had my wife translate this message to that school because I was enraged after meeting those girls. These girls were extremely bright. They had tremendous potential. They are stuck on an island, on a very small island, and they are just put at such a disadvantage when they are taught this stuff. So I had my wife translate this message, and in short, it just said, schools are a place to learn facts. It's not the responsibility of the teacher to teach them things other than that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a very surprised teacher. I just put it on a random desk, but I'm sure it made the rounds. Okay, so now with the election,
Yeah.
after such a hateful election, where do you see Indonesia going? What direction? Do you think Indonesia is going to head more towards liberalism, or do you think it's going to go backwards and revert to a more theocratic state?
I think in at least 5 years to come, Indonesia will go back to a more theocratic government. But after those 5 years pass, we need to see which leader gets elected. If it's a more secular, a more liberal kind of leader, I think Indonesia might have a chance to step forward and develop as a nation.
What's your take on atheism in Indonesia in the future? Do you have hope? Are you optimistic?
Well, in bigger cities such as Indonesia, Bandung, and Surabaya, I'm quite optimistic about that because people living in these cities are usually very well educated, some of them at least. And I do think that atheists might rise in numbers, but when you think Indonesia as a whole nation, I don't think atheism will be growing anytime soon.
Okay, well, on that happy note, we'll leave it there. I want to thank
All
you
right.
so much, Josephine, for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.